Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragnish Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapash Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin today on verse 17. That's on page 19 of your book. We're currently seeing the qualities essential to be a fit student of Vedanta. Verse 17. Vivekino viraktasya shamadi gunashalinaha Mumuksho revahi brahma jitnyasa yogyata mata. Fitness to pursue the knowledge of Brahman belongs only to one who is discerning and detached, who has qualities such as restraint of the mind, and who longs for freedom. So in this one verse, they've given very briefly the 4 essential disciplines for a student. And these will be discussed in detail in the subsequent verses. So this is just kind of an introduction to these 4 primary disciplines. In the earlier verse, we saw that it's important for the student to be intelligent, learned, and skillful in thinking. And last week, we saw very briefly the significance of each of these terms. What I would suggest is let's jump a little bit to verse number 42, because that also has qualities which are essential for a student. So it will be good to kind of study them all together. So please go to verse 42. That will be... Yes. Okay. So I'll read the verse first. Vidvans tasma upasatti miyushe mumukshave sadhu yathokta karine prashanta chittaya shamanvitaya tattvopadesham kripayaiva kuryat. The wise teacher graciously teaches the highest truth to the disciple, who is good, obedient, peaceful, and self-restrained, and who has approached the teacher in a prescribed manner with a longing for freedom. So, what is this approaching a teacher in a prescribed manner? Traditionally, they used to say in the Vedic period, the student would approach with a little bit of firewood in hand. And partly because one of the first things that happened, because all worship in those days occurred, it was a fire worship. So this was just a symbolical way the student made it known to the teacher that whatever is necessary for my training, I'll be happy to help. In fact, those days there were no schools the way we have now. So education really meant going and staying in the teacher's home. The student almost became like a member of the teacher's family, almost like a son or daughter of the teacher. And so just like we would happily do whatever chores are needed at our own home, whatever our parents might expect of us, the student accordingly did that in the teacher's home as well. So that was the prescribed manner in those days. But this is still an external requirement. Internally, what is required is the willingness, the desire to learn and to do everything possible for the acquisition of knowledge. And that's why it says, a student who is good, obedient, peaceful. About obedience, many years ago, almost a quarter century ago, in one of the editorials I'd written when I was editing a journal in India, I had said something very positive about obedience. And that time I received a letter from someone here in the United States saying that the word obedience sends a chill up the collective American spine. And we know, of course, that whenever we speak about obedience, the obvious follow-up question is, obedience to what? Obedience to whom? We know that if we do atrocious things in the name of obedience, then they cannot be forgiven. They cannot be excused. The Nuremberg Trials come to mind. Many of the Nazi officers who were on trial, they said that they were just carrying out orders. So obedience needs to be qualified. If the authority whom I'm obeying asks me to do something which is immoral or bad, how obliged I am to obey such an authority. And therefore, every time we speak about obedience, we need to qualify that statement by making sure that the authority or the figure that we are obedient to, the judgment of that figure can be trusted. Which is why here, the wise teacher. So if we go to a teacher whose judgment we trust, who is enlightened, and to be enlightened, you have to be the epitome of goodness and purity and perfection. And to such a teacher, obedience to such a teacher is in fact a great asset in spiritual life. But even obeying such a teacher does not mean that we do it blindly. That at every step in our spiritual journey, we should be alert. We should use the intelligence and the power to judge that God has given us, and do and believe and think only that which resonates with our head and heart, which makes sense. So there is no such thing as just blindly following anything or anyone. So obedience, because it is not blind, because the student has the freedom to discern what should be obeyed, what is worthy of following, what is not worthy of following, obedience is really a form of discernment. Similarly, peaceful. The Sanskrit word here is prashanta chitta. Now, peace can only come through a firm adherence to an ethical life, moral life, which would necessarily require detachment from everything that is immoral, everything that is unethical. And therefore, peaceful includes the practice of detachment. The next adjective there is self-restrained. In Sanskrit, it is shamanvitaya. Self-restrained is clearly the control of the mind, control of the senses, having oneself under one's own control. And this is the third requirement. Remember, we're talking about the 4 basic disciplines which were described in a verse we read earlier. So this verse is, although describing it in different words, is essentially repeating the message that was given in the earlier verse. And finally, mumukshu, which means one with the longing for freedom. So these 4 adjectives, obedient, peaceful, self-restrained, and longing for freedom, are exactly the 4 basic disciplines which we will study in detail right now. So if you now go back to that earlier verse, so let me read that verse 17 again. Fitness to pursue the knowledge of Brahman belongs only to one who is discerning, that's 1, who is detached, that's 2, who has qualities such as restraint of the mind, that's 3, and who longs for freedom. That's why I wanted to study verse number 42 alongside this, because it conveys exactly the same message, but worded somewhat differently. So now let's go through the next verse. Here, as I said, the section on the 4 basic disciplines begins. In Sanskrit, this is called sadhana chatushtaya. Sadhana means spiritual practice. Chatushtaya means a group of 4, 4-fold spiritual disciplines. So let me read that verse. Sadhananyatra chatvari kathitani manishibhihi yeshu satsveva sannishthā yadabhave na siddhyati. The wise have spoken of 4 disciplines, possessing which the pursuit of Brahman succeeds, in the absence of which it fails. Therefore, most classical Vedanta texts will begin with these 4 requirements to be a fit student of Vedanta. And it's very blunt here. If you possess these, you will be successful in your spiritual life. If you don't, you won't. Now, this raises a question. Since these are the preliminary disciplines we need to be an ideal student, do we have to wait until we attain perfection in these 4 before starting the study and practice of Vedanta? Or do we start the practice even before we have attained perfection in these 4? And the answer is, we don't have to wait for perfection. Even if we have these 4 primary disciplines in varying measures in our life, we can begin our study and practice with the recognition that our understanding and our practice, the success in how much we will understand and how well we can practice, will depend on how much of these 4 disciplines we have been able to live up to in our own life. So it goes on a 2-track thing. We hold on to these 4 disciplines, practice them even if imperfectly. But as we continue practicing them with earnestness, gradually we are able to improve the way we are able to practice these disciplines. And the more we are able to improve the way we do it, the fitter we become. That increases our clarity of understanding and the quality of our practice. So all of these things are related. Now, none of us can say that one or more of these four we don't have in us at all. I would find it very difficult to believe, because unless we had at least a little bit of each of these four, you wouldn't be here today. You wouldn't have thought it worth your time and energy to spend on studying this text. So all of these four are present in the hearts of all of us to a varying measure. Now, verse 19 begins to describe each of them in greater detail. Let me read verse 19. Adau nityanitya vastu vivekaha pariganyate ihamutra phalabhoga viragaha tadanantaram shamadishatka sampattir mumukshutvam iti sphutam. First comes discernment, viveka, between the real and the unreal, followed by detachment, vairagya, from pleasures here and hereafter. The six treasures, such as restraint of the mind, samadhi, shat, sampatti, and longing for freedom, mumukshutva. So these are the very succinct way of putting these four, and then the subsequent verses will take each of them one by one and describe them in greater detail. It's important to recognize the relationship between these four disciplines. Each preceding discipline can be viewed as a cause of the succeeding one. So first is discernment, the ability to see things clearly. And that's why the book, which is called Vivekachudamani, is primarily about discernment. And that's why we've titled it as Looking Deeply. We need this ability not to live only on the superficial plane of life. Sometimes when we look around, we see people's lives are so superficial. And if it's superficial, you know that the surface of water on the ocean is just filled with waves and ripples. It's never very quiet. But if you go deep down, if you go several miles underneath, if you go to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, the water there is completely still. Our mind is like that as well. The more we remain on the superficial plane, all these stresses and anxieties and worries and conflicts that we have going on in our minds, all of this is at the very upper layer of the mind. And most people live their entire lives on these upper layers of the mind. And therefore, very few people experience really sustained amount of peace. Yes, there are times when we feel peaceful and quiet and wonderful, but they are as fleeting as sometimes the spring is, sometimes as the winter ends and we are all rejoicing, the spring is here, and then suddenly summer comes upon us, and we never really know when spring arrives and when it disappears. So the moments of peace that we experience in our life are oftentimes like that. Every one of us, we do have these moments when we just feel at peace with ourselves, and at peace with the world around us. But then something happens. You just remember, I've got to finish this, I've got to do that. Or you remember something, or someone calls you, and then that peace completely gets shattered. So discernment, the first requirement is the ability to look deeply. And when we look deeply, we will begin to see what is good, what is not good. What is good for me, what is not good for me. We need discernment with regard to everything in life. With regard to food, when you go to a restaurant, well, sometimes they'll have lots of things on the menu. And you really have the freedom to choose whatever you want. But that time we use our discernment, we use our viveka to determine this thing is good for me and this thing is not good for me. There may be something there which I like very much, but perhaps I discover that's really not good for me. So even if I like it, I say no to it. So that is discernment, that is viveka. So distinguishing between what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is real, what is unreal. When we are able to make that kind of a distinction between what is healthy and what is unhealthy, then any sane person would choose what is healthy and give up what is unhealthy. I mean, sometimes we do something wrong knowing that it is wrong. But generally, once we know that something is bad for me, something is not good for me, the next step would be to reject what is bad. And that is vairagya, that is detachment. So once I know what is the difference between good and bad, it is easy then to detach ourselves from that which is bad. When I know that something is going to hurt me, it is easy to detach myself from that. But as long as I feel something is good for me, then it's very difficult to detach myself from that. So sometimes when people feel that detachment is tough because if something feels good, if something is very attractive, if something feels like it is in my best interest, why would I want to detach from it? So in order to have that natural, effortless spirit of detachment in me, I need to look at it deeply. I don't have to detach from everything. I just have to detach from things which are not in my own interest. And depending on, everyone will have their own way of defining what their interests are. So discernment is necessary not just in Vedanta, but in everything in life. We have to determine what is in my interest, what is not in my interest, and then look at everything, whether the company, place, food, whatever, and find what is good for me, and I might detach myself from what is not. That's what I meant by saying that each succeeding discipline is a result of that which precedes it. So that's how viveka, discernment, leads to detachment. And then detachment, once we are able to detach ourselves from things which create conflict and stress in our heart, then these 6 treasures, such as restraint of the mind, all those 6 treasures will be described later on, all of them are easier to practice. The mind automatically becomes quiet because all the distractions are removed. And when that happens, with that mental clarity and detachment and a quietness, this longing for freedom becomes natural. So it's not enough to say that Vedanta says the goal is liberation. Vedanta can say whatever it wants, but in our life, freedom or moksha cannot become truly my goal that goal cannot become real to me unless and until I begin to experience bondage in my heart. Unless I feel I am bound, why will I want to be free? Freedom from what? If I feel I'm already free now, then freedom cannot be the goal for me. So in order for freedom to become real in my life, first bondage has to become real. In order for me to acquire the desire to know, I must first become aware of my ignorance. If I don't know something and I acknowledge my ignorance, then there is a chance that I might try to remove that ignorance. But if I am in denial of my ignorance, then I wouldn't even want to know anything. And therefore, discernment, detachment, the six treasures, all of these will bring about that clarity in my whole being. I will see that in my present state, I am bound, I am not free. And that longing for freedom will spontaneously grow in my heart. The phrase here, Shamadhi Shat Sampatti, it's actually, the word is Shama. Shama means control of the mind. Adi means what in English sometimes we just say etc. So it means Shama etc. And this is a very common form of usage in Sanskrit. So we will see sometimes what they will also do is certain formulations which are well known, they will just mention the first of that and say etc., as we oftentimes do in our writings and conversation as well. So let's go to verse 20, which describes in detail the first discipline, Viveka. Brahma satyam jagan mithya iti evam rupo vinishchayah soyam nitya nitya vastu vivekas samudarhitah. An example of discernment between the real and the unreal is the firm conviction that Brahman is real and the world is an appearance. As most of you are aware, Brahman is not the name of a person, it's not the name of a state. Brahman simply means the vast, the infinite. There is another similar word that occurs in books called Brahma, the elongated A in the end, Brahma. Now Brahma is a form of the Vedantic Trinity, if you like, the creative aspect of the divine, that function of the divine by which this entire universe seems to emerge, that a personified form of that function is often called Brahma. Then that aspect of the divine in whom this creation seems to rest is oftentimes personified as Vishnu. And that aspect of the divine unto whom all of this projected universe returns is often personified as Shiva. So Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva. And there's a lot of mythology and stories connected with all three of them. So that Brahma has to be distinguished from Brahman. So Brahma, there is a masculine name, is a male deity if you want to ascribe gender to Brahma. In contrast, Brahman is actually neuter gender, is neither masculine nor feminine. And it's good to recognize that the highest reality is beyond gender. It's neither a he nor a she. Because gender belongs to the body, and a body imposes a limitation. And this one is infinite. Nothing can limit it. So no form can limit it. And body invariably involves a form. And therefore it's beyond gender. So every time you read the word Brahman, just keep this at the back of your mind, that this means just the infinite reality. That Brahman is real and the world is an appearance. The word for appearance here is mithya. Now this is something very important to understand in the study of this entire book. The meaning of real. What is reality? Because we are going to use the word real a lot of times. We are also going to use the word unreal a lot of times. So we need to get our definition clear in our head. When is a thing real? A superficial answer to that question would be, well, if I see it, it's real. If someone were to ask me, well, is this thing real? And I would say, of course it's real. I can see it, I can touch it. It seems very real to me. Because if it were not real, it wouldn't make any sound. So that's generally the way our mind seems to think. So long as something is perceived by the senses, it reacts, it responds, I can feel it, I can see it, I can touch it, well, it's real. The problem with that way of thinking is that we don't apply that way of understanding uniformly in our human experience. That is because when we go to sleep and when we dream, and let's say in my dream, I find an object like this. And in my dream, someone asks me, is this real? And I'm going to say exactly the same thing. I'm going to say, of course it's real. And I'm going to take this other thing and say, look, it's real. So everything, all of the reasons that I give now to affirm the reality of this can be given in my dream as well. But when I wake up in the next morning and the dream vanishes, and if someone were to ask me, that object that you saw last night, was it real? And I would say, of course it's not real. Because the entire night I was just lying in my bed. I didn't hold any object in my hand at all. It just didn't exist. So that's the problem. I'm able to dismiss exactly the identical object which did exactly the identical things in my dream as unreal, while right now I'm saying it's real. So the only reason why I say that the dream object was unreal is that it just vanished. When I woke up in the morning, I didn't see it. There is no other reason why we can say it was unreal. But if we think about our experience now in the waking state, why do I think it's real? Because just as the dream world did not exist before I went to sleep, and it did not exist after I woke up, this world does not exist after I go to sleep and remains non-existent for me as long as I'm sleeping and seems to appear when I wake up. There is really no difference. But we have this feeling in us that this world seems to have a greater persistence than the dream world. Because every night we have a different dream, but every morning we wake up, we don't see a different world. That's how the mind thinks. There's a lot of discussion about dream and thing that will come up later on, so I don't want to take too much time with it, but just to kind of emphasize that this kind of incongruency in our way of thinking, the Vedic teachers, therefore, came to a very simple equation. And that is, if something is real, it is eternal. The word for real is Sat or Satya. The word for eternal is Nitya. So in Sanskrit, that equation would be Satya equals Nitya, or real equals eternal, which means there is no such thing as temporary reality. If something is only temporarily real, it's not really real. It's only an appearance. And then we go to the classical example of a rope in a semi-lit room which is mistaken for a snake. We enter a room, we find a snake on the floor. We are terrified, we shout, we ask for help, then someone comes and switches on the light, and I see it's only a coiled rope. Is that snake real? And we'll say, of course it's not real, it was only a rope. But until I knew that it was a rope, when I did not know that it was a rope, I was frightened. I wanted help. I shouted. Why would I do that by just looking at a rope? For that time, at that moment, the snake was real to me. But that reality of the snake vanished, and therefore we say it's unreal. So that is what is said here. So discernment is when we recognize that everything, the world, and what is the world? The Sanskrit word for the world is Jagat. If you take the etymology of the term Jagat, it really means that which is constantly moving, constantly changing, that which is not constant. And we will see later on, many of these Sanskrit words, if you go to the etymological meaning, you understand the characteristic of that thing as well. So Jagat, or the world, literally means that which is constantly changing, that which is constantly moving. And therefore it is an appearance. Oddly, the reason we give to ascribe reality to something is the same reason Vedanta teachers give to say it's not real. In Shankaracharya's commentaries, he will say that when I look at a tree and I see a tree, I will say the tree is real because I see it. And Shankaracharya will say the tree is an appearance because I see it. Same reason. And the meaning is this, that any perception, any knowledge that is mediated through my senses and my mind is not direct. It's not direct knowledge. And we know that our senses fool us. If I have a defect in my eye, if my mind is not clear, things that I see, things that I interpret, they get distorted. Nor can we say that we are seeing the world exactly as it is. We are only seeing the world as much as our senses will allow us to see. And our senses are not all powerful. Our senses give us only a limited view of the world. Look at the vibrations of sound. There are only a certain spectrum, a certain I don't know what the technical term is, a certain segment of those vibrations which the human ear is capable of grasping. So any sound which is beyond that, even if it is there, I won't hear it. Smell, the sense of smell. It is said that dogs have a sense of smell which is several thousand times more powerful than a human, what a human being can smell. So it would be wrong to think that just because all my faculties are great, I'm seeing the world exactly as it is. No, I'm not seeing the world exactly as it is. A dog can smell a lot more smells anywhere the dog goes, and we won't be able to get that smell. So a dog senses things that we don't. Many of the cats can see things at night which we can't. So our eyes are limited, our ears are limited, everything is limited. So it's a very limited view of the world that we see. With that, such a limited perception of the world, how foolish it is then to go about and say, I know exactly what the world is. This is what the world is, or this is what I see. Even the ability of some of the instruments we have, sure, because of science and technology, we are now able to extend the capacity of our senses. Using a microscope, using a telescope, I'm able to see things which my bare eyes won't be able to see. But even those things have limitations. The reality is much more subtle, much more vast than our senses and mind can comprehend. And Brahman, the reality that transcends, that is free from all these limitations, is the only entity that is real. Anything other than that transcendent being is an appearance. It would be wrong to say it's not there. All that we can say is it appears to be there, but it's really not there. So there are these two terms in Sanskrit. One is, as I just explained, it's called mithya, which means, which is unreal, but which appears to be real. The second word is just the exact opposite of sat. Sat is real, asat is unreal. So these two terms, mithya and asat, both mean unreal with this slight distinction. Asat means you cannot even see it. It's not even there as an appearance. While mithya may appear, but it's still unreal. An example of asat, in the classical example, many of these old books, they'll say Shashashringa, a rabbit with horns. Now, I think when those books were written, they didn't think about transplanting organs from one species into another. Today, it may be possible to have a rabbit with a horn in a laboratory. So probably we can't use that example anymore. But there's one other example we can use. Think about a square circle. Can you think about it? Can you visualize a square circle? We say no. I mean, just because we can give a name to it doesn't necessarily mean it exists. So a square circle, we can say, is totally unreal. It's not even possible as an appearance. Well, a snake mistaken in a rope, or a dream world, or any of these other forms, it's possible to see it, but it's not real just because we see it. So, recognizing this distinction, and everything that we experience in life, everything, every thought, every perception, if I am alert and just I'm able to see, this is not real. Or better, at least in the beginning, is to say, this is only an appearance. It's as fragile as the things that I see in my dream. So this practice of always being alert, always trying to see what is really real and what is only apparently real, that is called viveka or discernment. And the next words then will go on to describe the other disciplines. So we will stop here today with viveka. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, feel free to ask.
Namaskar, Swamiji. Swamiji, two questions. First one is in verse 19, where each quality is there's like a cause and effect piece there. But in the first quality, discernment, if you ever have the realization of what is actually real, then doesn't that in itself make you feel free? Or is that sense of freedom a false sense of freedom that you get when you realize that this is unreal? And the second question I have is kind of a funny question, but how should we think about our ancestors when we think about unreal or reality being something that is eternal? Ancestors, even like dinosaurs or little animals that die, how do we think about that?
Okay, sure. What was your what? I think it's better to ask question one by one. So what was the first one? I'm sorry.
The first one was in verse 19, when we talk about discernment.
Oh yes, about freedom, the sense of freedom. Okay, yes. So, as in everything in life, there are always gradations. So yes, the ultimate freedom is moksha. But we do have levels of freedom earlier. So just as when you don't know something and you acquire the knowledge for it, it does liberate you from that ignorance of that thing. And it does give you a sense of freedom. Similarly, if there is something that you have been trying to use your power of the will to do the right thing. Something, let's say, if someone notices that they have a certain weakness and they are determined to not make that mistake again, and they succeed for a while in using their willpower, using their discernment in having that control over themselves. And that practice of having that self-restraint does bring joy, does bring a sense of freedom. So, as we continue our spiritual practice, we will be experiencing these tiny bits of freedoms as we go about practicing them. And that's good, because the sense of joy and freedom we experience in these accomplishments of achieving something which we were not able to do before, or understanding something that we did not know before, strengthens our resolve, strengthens our faith in the practice, and we feel like moving ahead with greater enthusiasm. And so yes, that freedom is not false, but it shows us that we are on the right track. Regarding ancestors, so this is a big subject, but very briefly, the whole theory of evolution, and I know, and all of us are aware, this is a big debate and big controversy about whether evolution is always associated with science, and those who oppose the theory of evolution are these kind of people of faith. Not all people of faith, but clearly there is this debate in the country. So what is Vedanta's position with regard to evolution? Again, it's very difficult to say it very briefly, but I will try. That there is such a thing as cause and effect. And when you believe in cause and effect, clearly the cause comes earlier, the effect comes later. So the question is, when this whole world came about, did it come all at once, or did it come one after another? Now, theory of evolution would seem to suggest, of course it came one after another. The earth and this whole material universe has had millions of years of history behind it. And there are studies which show how many millions of years it took for a certain stage and so on. Is all of that false? And it's always helpful in these matters to kind of go back to our dream experience. So when I go to sleep, let's say I go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night, and 5 minutes after I'm in my bed, I've fallen completely asleep. By 5 past 11. By 10 minutes past 11, my dream has started. By 15 minutes past 11, I'm 5 minutes into my dream. Now the question is, the dream world that was created, the mountains and rivers that I see in my dream, the animals and the human beings that I see in my dream, my grandfather who I see in my dream, and God forbid a dinosaur that I see in my dream, were they all created at the same time, or were they created one after another? When I meet my grandfather in my dream, really speaking, we were both created at the same time. But along with the idea that my grandfather is older than me, my grandfather was the cause, and then my parents were the effect, and now they are the cause, I am the effect. So it's possible, at least from our dream experience, to imagine a scenario when it is possible for everything to come at once, along with the idea that things have come one after another. So that's my take on this, how we should look upon our ancestors or things which came before. As long as we are in this realm of cause and effect and time, in fact, later on we will see this whole concept of our present experience, the world as it is, sometimes simply called Maya, is really the domain of these three entities: space, time, and causality. In Sanskrit, it's called Desha, Kala, Nimitta. That's the limitation of the mind. The mind invariably thinks in terms of time, space, and causality. And because the mind thinks that way, the mind asks questions like, what about my ancestors? When did this world come? Why did it happen? So a why question assumes that everything happens for a reason. Any question beginning with when assumes that there is such a thing as time. Any question that asks about why, what came after what, assumes both time and causality. So all of our questionings are based on certain assumptions. As long as we accept those assumptions, all these questions need to be answered. But if the assumptions themselves are questioned, then we are in a whole different territory. And one final thought. It's very glib and easy to say, all this is unreal, all this is appearance. And a lot of time people do say that. But that's not helpful. That's not helpful because it's not about question about saying that all this is an appearance. Am I actually seeing it as an appearance? And the answer is no. It's still right now only an intellectual process. I'm still kind of reasoning things out and saying it. I will not be able to see all of this is an appearance until I see that my own body and mind are also an appearance. As long as this is real too. As long as my form is real, I have got to give a provisional reality to every other form in the universe. The mistakes that many make is to cling to their own forms, cling to their own identity, and question the identity of everything else. That's the main thing to learn in this book. That yes, everything is an appearance, but that everything includes my body, includes my mind, includes my ego. If I'm able to, even intellectually, see that my own body and mind are also an appearance, then at least I have some standing in making a statement that this world is an appearance. And just think about it. If I look upon this body as an appearance, I will no longer be worried about death. I will no longer be worried about sickness. If I see that my mind is an appearance, it won't matter to me whether I am happy or miserable. So it's very easy to theorize about these things. So we have to, even when we think about these lofty subjects and very abstract principles, we have to have our feet firmly planted in our present experience. Yes, we will reach that state, but it won't happen by merely talking about these things. We have to live, and that's the great challenge. Not just think, but if what we think makes sense to us intellectually, then we must have this tremendous willpower to then say, I'm going to live according to it. And that needs a lot of courage. Sometimes understanding these things intellectually is not that difficult. With some amount of clarity, we can understand everything that the book says. The challenge is in remembering it, and even after remembering it, to living according to it. So those are the two main hurdles that is so easy to forget. Right now when we are talking on these things, kind of wonderful deal, oh, I'm the infinite spirit, oh, I'm Brahman. And then you go out and you find that you have been given a ticket because you were parked in a wrong place. And then Brahman gets very upset. So it's so easy to forget. And sometimes even when we know what's the right thing to do, we may not have the courage to do it. Partly because of the force of past habit, the way of thinking, the way of doing, there would be a resistance. But also sometimes the feeling about what would others think. So I will just conclude with just one small story. It was about one young man who wanted to lead a contemplative life. And so he tried to meditate, but always found there was so much disturbance. And so he thought, let me go to some quiet mountainside and a cave and sit there and meditate. So he went there and started spending time in deep contemplation. And it so happened that some people who were passing by saw this person in deep meditation, and so they thought, oh, and so they felt good about it, and so they brought some fruits for this person. So this young man opened his eyes and found fruits there and said, well, good, I won't have to worry about my dinner tonight. And so gradually the word spread, and people in that village came to know, here is this holy man who spends his time in meditation and prayer, and they started coming often. And then after a few days, this young man realized, I wanted quiet. I wanted to lead a contemplative life. Now all these people are coming all the time and disturbing me. And where will I find that quiet that I want? So then he goes to another great yogi and says, I need help. All of these people now come and ask me and disturb me and want to talk to me. I just want quiet. What shall I do? Where can I find it? So then that yogi said, I have an idea. He said, I will spread a rumor in this village that you have gone crazy, you've gone mad. I will also put a few bones outside the cave and let people know that you just eat any creature who goes nearby. And if any person still visits you, you come out, spread your face filled with ashes, and come with stones and start throwing at them. And this yogi said, this young man says, no, how can I do that? People will think I'm crazy. and then this yogi said, well, then of course, then you have to do what the people expect of you to do. If what others think of you is so important to you, then don't talk about I am the infinite one. I am all that exists. And yet I'm worried about what others think of me, what impression I make on others. Now, this is a kind of a very kind of a black and white kind of a story. But in some ways, that's the story for every spiritual seeker. That even when we try to think about and reflect on the teachings of books like this, we also have in our life other connections, other relationships, other things that we need to take care of in life. And at some stage, there is going to be a little bit of a tug of war, that my way of seeing, thinking, is going to not always be in complete harmony with the way I was already seeing, thinking, and the way other people were seeing me and doing things. And so everyone has to find a way of keeping their spiritual life going strong without unnecessarily creating any conflict or disharmony in the world in which we already are. And the reason is simple, that the more we get into conflict or disharmony with people and things around us, then that itself is going to be a distraction. Then I won't be able to give my entire mind, entire being to the spiritual ideal. So it's important for every spiritual seeker to find a way to live in harmony with everyone around, even if people around us hold completely different views. There is no need to go into just conflict with everyone, Nor are we ever going to find a place in this world to say, I'm going to go away from all of this. We can't. People speak about renouncing the world. Where will we go? No matter anywhere on this planet we go, we are still in this world. In fact, Shankaracharya says in this book and in other books as well, that even the highest heaven, sometimes in the book they speak about Brahmaloka, the highest heaven, even that is a part of samsara. Even that is a part of the world. So there is nowhere to go. I think being in the world is not a problem. The world being inside me is the problem. So that is what as spiritual seekers we can try to do. The world is the right place to be in. Just like water is the right place for a boat to be in. But if the water enters the boat, that is the wrong place for the water to be in. And so we are all in the world. As long as we are embodied beings, we are in this material universe. In order for us to get out of it, it's not about getting out of this world, it's getting out of this world. Swami Vivekachudamani once said, what is this world that everyone speaks about? And he says, this body is the world. The mind is the world. Because all of our connection with the world is through the body and mind. When the body and mind become non-functional, almost, not totally, in deep sleep, the world vanishes. So, if we are able to take good care of this body and mind and find a way to transcend it, transcend its limitations, then we will automatically transcend the world. So we really don't have to worry too much about the external world. Just do what needs to be done. So long as you're holding on to an ethical, moral standard, you're fine. Just do what needs to be done. But take care of this world, my own physical form, my own mental attitudes. That is the real hurdle in life, not the things that we see outside. So we will stop here today, and then we'll continue this study next Wednesday. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This Sunday, as I mentioned last Sunday, so we have a guest speaker. Pravrajika Vrajaprana is a Vedanta nun from the Vedanta Society of Southern California and Santa Barbara. So she is visiting us, and she will speak on Sunday on the topic Learning from Nature. So all of you are welcome for the Sunday satsang. You're also welcome for the meditation we have on Saturday evenings at 6 o'clock. And this study group, of course, as always, Wednesday at 7:30. So we'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.